WGBR News Talk 1150. This is Carol Bowden. Our guest is in studio this morning. He braved the wintry roads and icy conditions and all that good stuff. And good morning, Jay DeLancy.
Good morning, Carol. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I've apologized to Jay. Thankfully, in radio, you guys can't see me, but now I have a guest that's looking at me in my hat, sweatshirt, and boots here. But
it's a monogram hat, though. It's very classy.
Thank you very much.
You got to know.
Well, it is definitely monogrammed, and it was the fastest thing I could grab this morning trying to brave the roads and the ice and the wind and get here. But anyway, it wasn't all that bad, but it was mighty early. So thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who are meeting Jay for the first time, he's executive director, and I have to mention Lieutenant Colonel retired U.S. Air Force, but executive director for the Voter Integrity Project of North Carolina. Now that's a mouthful, Jay.
It's true. Actually, we were thinking about saying Commandante or Presidente or something, but we thought we were going to be a nonprofit, so we started that way. But we've since decided that we're not going to be nonprofit. It's too difficult anymore to get the tax exempt status, so we went private corp.
So Jay is here to talk about. I'm going to read a little bit of what his bio says. That in early 2011, you launched this project, the Voter Integrity Project, to empower citizens who are interested in reforming the state's antiquated and fraud-friendly election laws, which I love. So are you in favor of what Governor McCrory and his administration is doing?
We think he certainly moved in the right direction, yes. There's more he could do because he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And there's a lot wrong with the system that is, some of it is actually outside of his control because some of our biggest problems are a result of Congress and a law they passed when Bill Clinton became president in 1993. So there are many miles to go, but Governor McCrory has certainly moved us in the right direction.
Well, I'm going to delve right in, and I don't like to be shy or even politically correct too often if I don't have to be. Reverend Barber came on and made the claim that there's no such thing as voter fraud, and there's a law in place with the right to vote that says you have to swear that you're telling the truth when you vote, and doing so is, not doing so rather is against the law. So in his mind, we don't need to even focus on voter fraud, and there's no such thing. But you and your company have discovered voter fraud over and over again.
Well, we've discovered some that we've made public and some that we have not. But when originally I said there is no voter fraud, so we showed them 5 people who had registered and voted both in Florida and North Carolina, and the Board of Elections agreed to refer them for prosecution, and prosecutors have not prosecuted them. In fact, one of them, I'm told, is in Wayne County, but I can't release his name because he's being investigated, and unless they actually prosecute him, his name is not public. And so we're kind of caught in a double bind. But there is, since there is no prosecution for these 5 individuals, then there was no vote fraud. That's the way the Barber side of the equation goes. They look at it and say, unless there's prosecution, there is no fraud. And we're going, so if they don't write any tickets out on Highway 70 today, then nobody was speeding.
Well said.
Thanks.
Very well said. So what is the answer? How do we, first and foremost, how do we prosecute? How do we push that in our court systems to say this is a big deal? Because if one company here can find that many cases, then it has to be a little more frequent than perhaps what it's showing at this point in time. If you don't prosecute one, you're not going to prosecute any, and therefore it doesn't end.
Well, it's up to your listeners, as you hear your district attorney running for office, to ask that candidate. I don't know if it's a he or she, but ask them.
We have one of each.
Okay. Oh, ask them then. Good. Well, just say, how do you feel about vote fraud? Will you prosecute vote fraud if you get handed referrals from the State Board of Elections? I mean, that would be a good question. We would say, please ask your DA candidates, and of course, ask your legislators that too, because some who are running, I imagine here, just as everywhere else, they're going to be in denial that there's vote fraud, and they're going to In Colorado, they rolled back voter ID as soon as the other side, as soon as they went blue, they rolled it back. And so there are people of the Barber ilk who really want ease of access to the ballot. And to Reverend Barber's credit, he wants the poor to be able to vote. And for that, he and I both agree on that. And what I do, though, I look at it and go, there is a dynamic tension here between allowing anyone access to the ballot box and making sure they only vote once. And so we want safeguards to make sure people only vote once. That's why voter ID is so reasonable.
So you agree with voter ID?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's we want real voter ID, like McCrory has signed. Virginia, they did pseudo or virtual voter ID, where they allow so many different kinds of IDs, to include private employer ID, that you could set up a company that's sole purpose is to make fake IDs and make as many IDs as you want to. And that's the problem. You know, people go, there is no fraud, so this is silly. And the problem is, we don't know. We can't prove it. We've all heard legend of dead voters. You know, we heard LBJ and John F. Kennedy both owe their, and Mayor Daley of Chicago, they all owe their political viability to dead voters. And so history has changed. The availability after, this is a long story, but really in about 2003, they started implementing statewide databases of voters. And so 10 years later, in 2012, actually, we found dead voters in North Carolina. We found almost 30,000 of them that were registered to vote, but very few of them had voted. And that really it made us wonder, does that mean there is no vote fraud anymore? And what we realized, we didn't realize it right away, but that November, one of our analysts who he also has a job working in the election board. So many of our people are volunteers. They're auditors, they're computer programmers, engineers. And this guy, one of his jobs was in the election business. He actually worked in Durham County, and it hit him what was going on. There were inactive voters walking in. And inactives, that's a legal definition of people who no longer live where they lived before when they were registered. You get mail sent there, it bounces back, and eventually, instead of taking them off the roll, our great federal law that Bill Clinton signed called Motor Voter, or NVRA, it had a lot of details, and one of the details was you leave them on the roll for up to 2 federal election cycles. So even though we got mail back from them saying they don't live there anymore, and by law, that's bona fide evidence that they don't live there, yet they stay on the roll, and if anyone is dumb enough to walk in and utter the name and address of that voter, they can vote, no questions asked, no ID required. So you don't need dead people when you have that kind of list. And by the way, in Wayne County, I checked yesterday, as of Sunday night, Wayne County had 6,717 inactive voters on their roll. So these are people who are on the roll. They're the same as active, except that there's a little IN in front of the word active. So as far as their rights to vote, it's the very same. I would venture that clearly 90 to 95% of them don't live here. They're not here anymore.
And
I took your breath away. Sorry.
Yes, you most assuredly did, because I can't understand how, and that's a law that and I feel like I stay fairly well up on different politics. I did not know that was in place, it can remain on the books or by law has to for 2 federal elections.
Well, their excuse is they might come back. These are people who maybe they just weren't answering the mail. Now, in fairness to Wayne, y'all have a lot of military people who deploy, right, and they shut down their apartment. And when they shut down their apartment, they might not forward the mail, and it may come undeliverable. So military communities and high-density college communities tend to have more of these voters. And so we're not saying they're all fraudulent, they're all bad people. There's legitimate stories. People
Sure.
have lives, but really 6,700 of them, it's
Well, and I can see making accommodations for those who are in a more transient world with the military and, as you said, college towns. But
yeah,
there's a big but. There's a big but. One thing that I know for a fact was a case here in Wayne County during it was 2 federal elections ago when Obama was elected the first time.
Okay.
Gentleman that was actually a client of ours has a daughter at an adult facility for those with handicaps. And that's our key to take a break here, but Stay tuned. I'll tell you the rest of that story in just a moment. WGBR News Time is 8:47. We are with Jay DeLancy, Voter Integrity Project. You're going to want to hear this next part, so be sure to come back on WGBR News Talk 1150. Get along, little doggies. Good morning. WGBR News Talk 1150. The time is 8:50. That's some bad music
I want
right
to break
there.
into rawhide here.
No
Let's start
kidding.
singing. Hit them on, move them out.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Jay DeLancy. He is Executive Director, founder of Voter Integrity Project, and we're having a good time this morning talking here on your Tuesday edition of Newsmakers. I feel like it should already be Thursday with the length of hours in this winter storm, but maybe it's our last one. Maybe spring's coming, Jay.
Oh, don't jinx it.
Okay, I think you're right. So we're talking about voter fraud. Is there, isn't there? We're talking about just exactly what your company title says, voter integrity. And I was telling Jay just a moment ago that there was a gentleman, I'm going to leave all the names out right now, that actually worked for a client of ours whose daughter is at an adult facility for mentally disabled, mentally handicapped, however you want to say it, individuals. And she'd been in this particular system of for the mentally disabled since she was a young child. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, almost, 8 years ago, not quite 8 years ago, she tells him that she's going to go vote. And it was during President Obama's first election. And he said, "What do you mean?" And she had never voted in her entire life. She had the mental capacity, if I'm not mistaken, he said, of a 5 to 6 year old. So they were going to take her in and help her vote. And, and of course, walk in there. And had she not mentioned that to him, he would have never known. And he sat and played a little game with her to try to figure out if she didn't, in fact, know who she wanted to vote for and have the capacity to be able to distinguish which person she wanted to vote for. And that game did not work. Did not work.
Yeah, they took people who were totally non-communicative from the Berry Center and got them absentee ballots. Carolina Journal, a guy named Don Carrington, did a story on that. And we ran into someone whose daughter, very similar situation to the one you described. And we took all that to Skip Stam, one of the big leaders in the Republican legislature. And he's a lawyer, and he said that North Carolina, they give them rights that are assumed. Even if someone's declared mentally incompetent by the courts, they still get to vote unless the judge says they cannot. And we said, no, it should be the other way around. They should not be allowed to vote unless the judge says they can. And he said, long story short, we found out through the lawyers at the legislature and the real law writers who work in the bowels of the bureaucracy that it would take a constitutional amendment in North Carolina. So the legislature decided to punt for now. South Carolina has it that way, where if you're declared mentally incompetent, you have to get the judge to declare you competent to vote, or you're not voting. So instead, in North Carolina, we have probably tens of thousands of people who get dragged in. These are your caregivers. These are the people who give you food. These are the people who change your diapers. And these are people who are going to tell you who to vote for, and you're going to do it. They have power. This is no different than, why don't we allow 5-year-olds to go vote? Why don't we allow school teachers to take elementary kids in and let them vote? This is so maddening. Even Don Wright, the attorney for the state Board of Elections, he's a holdover from Gary Bartlett's regime, if you will. And even Don Wright is furious over this, and there's nothing we can do unless we can get a constitutional amendment, and it's going to take public pressure. So that's part of the reason we're here.
So once again, calling on all listeners, there's common sense, and it's frightening and
this is evil.
Extremely discouraging to think that you have to have a constitutional amendment for common sense issues within our state. I'm sorry.
It makes me so mad.
If you have, I don't care if you have a 75-year-old person, if that person has been deemed to have a mental capacity of a 5, 10, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, there's a reason that you must be 18 to vote.
Yeah, we have to protect those people against their abuse. They could be voting for Adolf Hitler and wouldn't know it. Or Mickey Mouse, they have no idea. Now, I'm generalizing. Obviously,
Sure.
I'm sure you could have callers that would say, oh, but I have so-and-so in my family and they're comment. How dare you say that person can't vote? I'm not saying that. I'm saying you have to specify that person has the right to vote. That's in Jay's world. Right now, we're not there, but that's what I want is that, just like South Carolina, that the person doesn't vote unless a judge says, yeah, this person is capable. And we have a son who's autistic, and he's very wisely told me that he didn't want to vote because he doesn't know who the candidates are and doesn't understand the issues. I'm sure that won't always be the case. At some point, someone will bat their eyes and get him fired up and say, you have every right to vote, and he'll get all militant about it, and he'll go in. He won't know why. He won't know what the issues are, but he'll probably vote because these people, my son included, I love him, but he can be easily led by others. And so, we'd like to protect those people from that kind of abuse. And so, that's what we view it as, is abuse.
Here's the thing. It is abuse, and we're at the point now in our nation that the change has to happen, that this excessive spending, out of control government stops.
You had to go there.
I do have to go there.
Yeah.
And if you have these types of things happening at the polls, it's not going to happen because we're not controlling it. We're not having people making conscious decisions about how their tax dollars are going to be spent and how their government is going to run things.
Well, our biggest, I agree with everything you said, but it's our lane really is stopping identity theft at the polls and vote fraud. People are going to steal identity for any number of reasons. And I'll blow your mind again. In 1982, there was a federal trial in Chicago that grand jury, and they actually found out at the end of it, they prosecuted and convicted 63 people. And do the numbers here. 63 people, and the grand jury estimated they stole over 100,000 votes. And I was arguing with an ACLU guy, and he goes, well, I can't deal with conspiracy theories. These were convictions. It wasn't conspiracy theory. It was what they call a conspiracy. And so that's what, when I wake up at 4:30 in the morning thinking about this stuff, that's what makes me stay awake. It's like, okay, what do we do? And this inactive voter business is this is the way they're going to do it. And we have a way to get them off the rolls. And I'm hoping in our last moment, how much time do we have here?
You've got a couple of minutes.
Okay. We have a way to clean them off the roll, and we had something a while back called a boot camp where we told people how to do it, and we've actually started doing it. And it's a lot of work for local people in the county. And so if they're inactive and they don't live here anymore, then they need to be removed. If they're inactive and they do live here, then they need to answer the mail and get active. So anyway, that's one thing. And the other is William Barber, you mentioned earlier. He's trying to shut us down. He's actually harassing us with his deep pockets of lawyers. He gets all this government money, and he spends a lot of it on lawyers. And so there's a D.C. law firm that wants to get pretty much everything we have, our hard drives, everything short of our hard drives. They've subpoenaed it, and we've had to hire attorneys to say, oh, no, you can't. We're a private organization, actually a private business, and they want to see all of our email to each other within any volunteers ever work with us. They want to know their names, which is evil. I'm sorry, I hate to throw that around, but
it's fine.
They want to know the names of our people.
What is his goal?
Well, he claims to be getting it because he has to prove that this whole thing was racially motivated, and that the email will prove that we're all just a bunch of, Klansmen in suits or something. But the bottom line to it is what he really wants, what the whole side wants, is to find out who our supporters are and then start isolating them and destroying them one at a time. Just doing to our supporters what they did to Art Pope and to the Koch brothers and all that stuff. And so they need those names in order to do it. And so we're defending in court. We're having to raise money for it. And so that's another reason I would love for your listeners to go to our website. Any volunteers or anyone who's seen vote fraud to go to our website and fill out a form, or to go and help us at voterintegrityproject.com.
There you go, voterintegrityproject.com. Jay DeLancy, thank you so much for being here today.